Hello friends, welcome to the lecture series History of India from 1700 to 1950, and today we will talk about Phule, Dr. Ambedkar and the caste question. As we know that Indian society had this custom of the caste which was in a way discriminatory to a number of sections which were there in the society, and some of the reformers, they did an important role in the framework of the caste system, especially Jyotiba Phule, Dr. Ambedkar. They talked about this kind of an aspect which was there in the Indian society, and they initiated some kind of reforms with the establishment of certain institutions or bodies or societies on their part, and they tried to create awareness among the lower castes that how they have to be equal in that sense, and they have to make efforts in the framework of getting educated, so that the ideas of equality and liberty and fraternity, all of them, they should be there for all castes. So in the course of our discussion today, we will talk about the efforts which are made by Jyotiba Phule, Dr. Ambedkar with regard to the question of caste system which was there in India, and how they were able to in a way mobilize people on this particular issue, and at the same time how the people, they were also being motivated to come out of their shell, and in that sense they have to realize their self-worth or self-respect in that sense. So when we talk about this particular period, especially the kind of reforms which were in a way were talked about by Jyotiba Phule in the 19th century, and thereafter in the earlier part of the 20th century we find Dr. Ambedkar, who also talks in the similar vein, and how he was instrumental in the framework of the constitution, and how some of the provisions with regard to caste, they were there in the constitution as well, where we talk about that right to equality was granted to everyone. So any kind of a discrimination on the basis of caste and other issues like creed, sex, etc., they will not be there. So when we in a way tend to start that what was happening in the mid 19th century, we find Phule began his work, and he was a social reformer in that sense, and how he was interested in education of the low caste boys and girls when he started a school for the girls of low and untouchable caste. So in that sense Phule realized that education was the key, and when education will be provided to the young boys and girls, then they will realize their self-worth in that sense, and they will be able to in a way fight for their rights as well. And we also see that how Phule asked his wife Savitribai to teach in the school as well, and he is open to more school for girls in 1851. And for the kind of initiative which was taken by Phule in the framework of education, where he himself was not associated but even his wife was also associated, we find that how he was honored by the Board of Education for the work he did for the girls' education in 1852. And we also see that Phule realized that how education was important in the framework of the society, and established a school for the untouchables as well, and a night school in 1852 as well. So we find that his work during this particular period in terms of educating the various sections of society, especially the untouchables and the girls, definitely played an important role. And we find that over a period of time, especially in 1858, he gradually retired from the management of these schools, and he entered into a broader field of social reform. So Phule was very well aware with regard to what was happening in the Indian society, and how over a period of time, because of various kinds of issues, whether it was in the framework of widow remarriage not happening in that sense, or child marriages, or the kind of discrimination which was being done to the girls or women. So he realized that, and he supported the kind of a movement for the widow remarriage in 1860, and he realized that once they will be remarried, then they will be able to lead their life in a normal manner, because in those times we find that the mortality rate was not all that high, and many times we find that the child brides they became widow at a very young age. So we find that how Jyotiba Phule in 1863 established a home for the prevention of infanticide as well, and both him and his wife, they adopted one orphan child from the home as well, because they had no child of their own. So we find that not only he was instrumental in talking about these kinds of issues in the society, but at the same time he was writing as well, and a book was published with regard to the caste system, which was written by one of his friends Padwal, and he published that. And we find the organization with which Phule is associated and he is remembered is Satyashodhak Samaj, and how this Samaj was playing an important role with regard to the reforms which were envisaged by Phule, and this was established, Samaj was established in 1873, and how the lower castes, they were to be in a way organized in this through this Samaj, and because they were critical of the social order which was there, which was based on the Varn and the caste system. So he realized the futility of the caste system in that sense, and we find that his colleagues also they played an important role with regard to the one of the newspapers which was founded by them, Dinbandhu, in 1877, which was the first newspaper of this movement. And we find that how government appointed him a member of the Pune municipality in 1876, and he continued as a member in 1882 and fought for the cause of downtrodden. So Phule was very well aware with regard to what was happening in the society, and he detested any kind of a discrimination which was being done to the fellow brethren, and that is how he, through his Samaj or the Satyashodhak Samaj which he established, or the kind of vision which he had for the society, he talked about equality of everyone. And we find that Phule himself was an original thinker, and he found it necessary not only to write the polemical pamphlets but also to put forward his basic philosophical positions as well. So we find that he was trying to put forward his ideas, and at the same time he was trying to be a leader and organizer of the lower caste movement in India. And he was pretty successful in that context, because we find that how the people, those who were being mobilized by Phule because of his efforts, and even Dr. Ambedkar realized or recognized his debt to Phule when he was inspired by so many others as well in terms of his work on the caste issue. We generally talk about Phule, and we talk about the various kinds of writings which were in a way written by him, and how these writings, they also made an impact as well. And Gulamgiri was one where he gave historical survey of the slavery of the lower castes, and how they in a way can come out of this particular system which was being devised for them. And we also see that in 1883 he published a collection of his speeches under title Cultivators Whipcord, where he has analyzed how peasants were being exploited in those days. So Phule was very well aware of the system of exploitation which was happening in those times, and how peasants or the cultivators, they had to bear the brunt of the exploitation which was being caused by the various policies which were initiated by the British. And we see that when you talk about peasants, then definitely the kind of efforts which have been put by them in the agricultural operations, and the kind of returns which they were being getting as they were being exploited by Sarkar, Sahukar and Zamindar. So it was being pointed out at different levels by Phule and others, and we see that through the writings we come to know his ideas on the social and the political issues. And we find that his social and political ideas They were also influenced by Christianity and ideas of Thomas Paine, and we find that Thomas Paine was known for his religious radicalism in England, and we find the kind of contribution which was made by Phule and the recognition of his great work for the lower caste. He was felicitated and the title of Mahatma was conferred on him by people of Bombay in 1888. So, this kind of a recognition by people definitely is one of the ways where we find that Phule was being recognized by the masses, and they realized that the kind of work which he was doing for them was instrumental in that sense in ameliorating their situation. We also see that how Phule was largely writing in Marathi, and this kind of a Marathi was also very colloquial in nature, in the sense that it was only meant for the masses, and we find that how Phule would have also liked the British government to put an end to the Balutedari system, which was connected with the caste specific occupations in the villages, and he asked the government to make laws prohibiting customs and practices that gave subordinate status to the women and the untouchables. So, we find that he was in a way aware that how women and the untouchables, they are being treated in the society, and how both of them, they need to be recognized, and how both of them, they have to be given some kind of a better treatment by the government. And he also realized that how the education had not percolated down to the lower sections of the society, and how the lower caste or the masses, they had not yet become politically conscious. So, he realized that political consciousness was one important aspect with which the people, they had to connect them, and how if they will be able to, if they will be politically conscious, then they will definitely make an effort to improve their condition. And we also see that how during this time, when he says that the high caste or class elites, they were also claiming that they were the true representatives of the people, and they were demanding the political rights for themselves. So, this process Phule thought would re-establish the political supremacy of the high caste. So, Phule in a way did not want the lower caste people to in a way support these kinds of agitations, because he felt that if these will be, they will be supported by them, then the elites, they will claim to be the true representatives of the people, which they were not. And he in a way suggested or to them that they should keep away from such kind of agitations or movements, and if they are going to support them, then they will be able to in a way re-establish the political supremacy of the high caste. So, Phule was very well aware about the situation in those times, and he in a way advised his followers from the lower caste not to participate in these movements, as I told you, for the political rights as well. And he in a way argued that the Indian National Congress or other political associations were not national in the true sense of the term, because they were only representing the high caste. So, he was in a way critical of such kind of a system where only the elite section of the society, they were being represented and they were being given the political rights. And we find that the Samaj which he established, as I told you, he made it a rule not to discuss the politics, and we find that he had expressed more than once a complete and total loyalty towards the British government, and he firmly believed that the Almighty God had dethroned the tyrannical rulers and established in their place a just, enlightened and peaceful British rule for the welfare of the masses. So, in that sense, we realize that how Phule had more faith in the colonial rulers or in the British rulers, and he also believed that they had some kind of a sense of justice and fair play as well. And we in a way realize that this kind of a situation where Phule was not very critical of the colonial rule at many times, and whenever he became critical of the colonial rule, it was because of the fact that he realized that how British they were in a way supporting the upper castes or classes. He also in a way talked about the condition of the lower caste, the way it had deteriorated over a period of time because they were being deprived of the political power, and he said that how when the lower caste they will be organized and when they will be able to secure power for themselves, then they will in a way legislate for themselves. And we find that how when he talks about organizing the lower caste under the banner of the Satyashodhak Samaj, then it was a political activity as well. And when he was talking about these kinds of issues, he was always talking in the framework of the social reform rather than the political reform. But one has to also realize that when he was only talking about social reform, then how the masses they had to be made politically aware as well, so that they are more aware about their rights and they can secure their rights through various legislations if they were available, or if they were not available, then such kind of legislations they should be drafted for them so that they are able to secure their rights. And he also felt or realized that when the lower caste people they are educated, then only they will be conscious of their political rights and how they will demand share in the political power as well. And then only some kind of a supremacy of the lower caste it will be established. So his writings, when one sees them, they were full of such kind of ideas when he was talking about the political rights. We also see when we talk about Phule that he was talking about a society which was to be egalitarian in nature, where everyone, whether all men and women of the society, they were enjoying the liberty. And Phule was also critical in that sense of the contemporary rulers, that their policies were going against this kind of an idea. So he realized that how the political rulers of that particular period, they also have to work in consonance in terms of bringing about change in the society. And he did not want that the upper classes or castes they should in a way rule, and their supremacy this should be there in the social, economic and the political field. Rather he wanted to replace such kind of a supremacy which was there in all these fields with the supremacy of the lower caste. And we find that when Phule realized that how the kind of policy which was followed by the British was detrimental to the interests of the lower caste, then he in a way talks about that, and he attacks that kind of a policy of the colonial rulers. And he in a way also talks about the issues of providing funds and then how these kinds of funds which were being provided by the government, but how facilities for the upper caste they were being created, more facilities were being created for them through those funds, and how the masses they were being neglected by the colonial rulers in terms of providing the finances. And we also see that how when he talks about the various kinds of issues, he brings it to the notice of the government that the greater portion of the revenue of the government was derived from the labor of the masses, that how masses they were contributing to that particular revenue, and higher and the richer classes they were contributing very little to the exchequer of the state, and the government therefore should spend a large portion of its income on the education of the masses and not on the higher classes. So he talks about the kind of contribution which was made by the lower castes and classes, and how this kind of a contribution which was made by them will definitely, it should definitely help the lower castes and classes. And he in a way talks about that such kind of benefits which were occurring because of the labor of the lower caste, they were being reaped by the higher sections of the society. And he was also writing about these kinds of aspects. One of them which he wrote in the framework was about slavery, and how the eyes of the government were to be opened with regard to it. And we find that Phule said that how the masses, they were being kept in ignorance and poverty. So slavery was to be rejected, and we find that education should be provided to the various sections of the society, so that they come to the same level of others. And we find that how government was also collecting a special tax for educational purposes, but funds which were derived from them, they were not spent on the education of the masses. So he criticized in a way the primary schools which were run by the government, by saying that the education imparted in these schools was not satisfactory. It did not prove the practical or useful, it will not prove to be practical or useful in future career of the students. So he was in a way critical of such kind of measures which were taken by the government, and he criticized them that how some kind of reforms it should be brought about in the education system as well. And he was also critical of the higher secondary schools, colleges, and the system of scholarships which are being provided to the masses. And he talked about the scholarship system, that how it was unduly favorable to the literary caste, while there was a need to encourage the lower caste children. And we find that when he became a member of the Pune municipality, he showed the rare courage in opposing a move to spend 1000 rupees on the visit of the viceroy. So he was very forthright in that sense. He realized the futility of such kind of measures, where when people were made welcome, now they were being welcomed in India, and at the same time the kind of money which was spent on such kind of events. So we find that Phule was conscious of such kind of things which were happening in the society. And when a dinner was organized in the honor of Duke of Connaught in 1888 at Pune, he went there in a typical dress of a poor peasant, and he did it deliberately as well. And he delivered a moving speech after the dinner and told them that it was the duty of the government to formulate the policies for the welfare of the peasants. And we find that in his writings criticism of government policies which went against peasants could also be seen. And we also see that how Phule realized that how Indian society was based on the inequality between men and exploitation of ignorant masses by the exploiters. And Phule believed that God, who is the creator of the universe, has created all men and women free and capable of enjoying their rights as well. And he talked about in this particular framework that how God has created all men and women as custodians of all the human rights, so that a man or a group of men should not suppress an individual. So we realized that how Phule realized that how the liberty of thought and expression was important to all the human beings, and the thought or the opinion one is expressing should not be harmful to anybody. This is what he also suggests as well. And he says that how the Maker has created all men and women who are capable of claiming a position in the civil service or municipal administration according to their ability, and no one should encroach upon equal liberty of other human beings. So we find that how Phule definitely was well aware about the kind of situation which was existing, and he, in spite of the kind of hardships which he had to encounter, he was very steadfast in that sense, in terms of bringing about the kind of changes which were required in the society. And he believed that how everyone was entitled to enjoy all things which have been created by the Maker, and how both men and women are equal in front of the law, as well as the kind of efforts which have to be made in the framework of bringing about change in the society. So everyone has to in a way contribute in that sense, and how men and women they are talked along, they are talked together by Phule, and he says that it did not mean when men are being talked about or mentioned, women are automatically included in that category. So he makes a special reference to women when he discusses human rights, and his Sarvajanik Satya Dharma put emphasis on truth seeking without aid to any guru or text. So we find that he placed equal importance to women, and any kind of customs which were not rational from his point of view, whether in the framework of child marriage or marriage between a young girl and old men, which were mismatched marriages, polygamy or objection to the remarriage of women, prostitution or the harassment of widows, all that was being attacked by Phule. And he also advised the Shudra peasants not to have more than one wife and not to marry their young children. So he in a way taught them, he in a way motivated them that they should marry only once, monogamy should be followed by them, and their young children should not be married by them, they should be educated first and then only they should be married. And we find that he gave some kind of a thought to the institution of marriage and devised a simple and modern contract type ritual for marriage ceremony of the members of the Samaj as well. And we find the way he discarded idolatry, ritualism, asceticism, fatalism and the idea of incarnation, and he did not want any kind of intermediary between the god and the devotee. And Phule never believed that any book was God ordained, and he wanted to establish a society which was founded on the principles of individual liberty and equality. So we will continue further with regard to our discussion about Phule and Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar and the caste question in our next lecture. Thank you very much.